Have you ever wondered what happens when respect turns to silence and silence turns to desire? When your boss's gaze lingers a second longer than it should, and you understand, even without words, that something has shifted in the air. Well, that's exactly how my story began. He was my boss, a man with impeccable posture, a sharp suit, a firm voice, and eyes that seemed to measure every move. At work, he was admired, intelligent, charismatic, and possessed a presence that silenced everyone when he entered. I respected him, or thought I did. But that night, when he closed the office door and said, "Now, no one needs to know," I realized that respect and power are very different things. It was late. The office lights were almost all off. I was finishing a report when I heard the door open behind me. It was him. The way he walked gave it away even before his voice. Always calm, confident, with that air of someone who controls even the silence. "Working late?" he asked. His voice had a low, almost intimate tone. I smiled awkwardly and said I just wanted to finish what I started. He approached slowly, rested his hands on the table, and stood there, too close. "You're dedicated. I like that." The compliment seemed harmless, but the way he looked afterward wasn't. There was something there, a game I wasn't sure I wanted to play, but one that had already begun. The scent of his cologne mingled with the distant sound of the elevators. That's when he said, "Let's talk for a minute, close the door." I closed it, and with that click of the doorknob began what I still call the turning point. He didn't talk about work, he talked about me, the way I dealt with people, my energy, the way I knew how to position myself. His words were chosen carefully, like someone testing the waters. I listened, but inside, I felt something different, a kind of alertness mixed with curiosity. His gaze wasn't that of a boss, it was that of a man. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "It depends on what you want me to trust," I replied. He smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "I want you to trust what's best for both of us." The sentence hung in the air, heavy with intent. I could feel the weight of each word. That's when he came around the table and stood beside me. He didn't touch me, but the distance was short enough to feel the heat of his body. The air seemed thicker. I could hear his breathing, slow, controlled. "Can you keep secrets?" he said. "It depends on the secret." "Then keep this one safe." His hand brushed the edge of the table close to mine. There was no direct contact, but that was enough. A second of silence, and the sound of the wall clock ticking. I couldn't say anything. My entire body seemed to freeze. "Now no one needs to know," he repeated, and the tone was no longer one of order but of promise. That sentence echoed for days. At work he was still the same boss, serious, exemplary, respected. But there was something new between us, an invisible code. Our glances lingered longer. Our conversations seemed to have two meanings. Sometimes he'd call me at the end of the day to discuss a report, and I already knew what that meant. Nothing explicit, nothing direct, just tension, the play of power and desire. And the worst part was, I didn't know if I wanted to run or stay. There was something hypnotic about the situation, a kind of fascination that only those who have experienced something forbidden can understand. Fear mixed with pleasure, risk hidden beneath control. Over time, I began to realize how much he enjoyed testing boundaries. A touch on the shoulder during a meeting, a whispered compliment, a lingering look when no one was looking. He knew I felt it, and he used it as part of the game. It was as if every gesture was an unspoken question. How far will you let me go? And the strangest thing is that even knowing what was happening, I didn't back down. Because deep down, there was something there that attracted me. Not just the man, but the power he represented. The power to see me, to choose me, to put me in a place I'd never been before. Looking back now, I understand that it was never just about desire. It was about control. About the weight of being in the hands of someone who knew how much I needed that job and how much my image depended on his. But back then I didn't see that. I only saw the sparkle in their eyes, the tone of voice, the teasing. And perhaps that is what most captures me about this memory to this day. The fact that everything happened between ordinary words, between small gestures, but which hid something much bigger. If you've ever been in a situation where power and desire became so mixed that you didn't know where one ended and the other began, then you know what I'm talking about. Now I want to ask you something. If this story made you think, if you felt like you've been through something similar, even if in a different context, please leave a like now. This shows YouTube that this kind of story needs to be told. And comment below what you think about this. You can write a word, a memory, or just "I understand." Because sometimes the simple act of writing is the first step to breaking the silence. And if you haven't subscribed yet, sign up now. Here I tell real, intense, layered stories about power, desire, and the truths many people prefer to hide. Ring the bell, because what follows will show what really happened after that night. And why sometimes secrecy is the cruelest form of prison. After that night, nothing felt the same. The office, once just a workspace, now felt like a minefield. Every hallway, every room, every glance carried an invisible tension. It was as if the air had grown thicker, and I knew exactly why. He acted as calmly as ever, polite, courteous, professional, but now his every gesture carried a different weight, as if there were a silent agreement between us. Except I never accepted any agreement. The next day I tried to act natural. I went to work, sat at my desk, and greeted people. Pretending is an art we learn quickly when fear mixes with desire. Because as much as I wanted to hate him, there was a part of me that still remembered the look in his eyes, the tone of his voice, the feeling of being seen in a way no one else could. It confused me. I didn't know if I wanted distance or if I wanted to understand what that really meant. He passed by my desk later, with that discreet smile only he could give. "Can you stop by my office later?" he asked neutrally. I just nodded, trying to pretend it was just business. But inside, my heart was already racing. When I walked in, he was standing near the window, his back to me. "Lock the door, please," he said without looking. This time his voice was lower, almost a whisper. I hesitated but eventually complied. "I want you to understand that what happened yesterday wasn't a mistake." Those words stuck in my mind. He turned, crossed his arms, and continued. "There doesn't need to be blame between us. Just understanding." It was unbelievable how he could speak with such calmness, as if he had mastered even the pauses. He came closer slowly and placed his hand on the table, not on me, but close enough for me to feel the warmth. "You're different," he said. "There's something I admire, and that scares me." That mixture of praise and threat left me speechless. I tried to keep my gaze steady, but he knew how to dismantle me without touching me. The silence between us weighed more heavily than any words. It was as if the air were filled with something I couldn't name. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a mix-up, a dangerous game that would soon be over. But another part, the one I tried to hide even from myself, felt a strange curiosity, a kind of attraction that wasn't just physical but psychological. He represented everything I'd never had the courage to be: bold, dominant, someone who didn't ask permission to feel. In the following days, he kept his distance, but I knew the game was still going on. A glance during a meeting, a short text message, a call to discuss something urgent, and always in the same tone, calm, confident, provocative. "Do you have time for me tonight?" he wrote once. I read the message several times before responding. Fear and desire warred within me. In the end, I typed, "It depends on what you need." He replied within seconds, "From you, but of course no one needs to know." That phrase came back like a trigger. No one needs to know. Now it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like an invitation. And that scared me more than anything, because I realized I was giving in. That part of me wanted to go. On the appointed night, the building was empty. The lights were off, the sound of wind hitting the windows. When I entered, he was sitting there, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his jacket draped over the chair. "I thought you weren't coming," he said, without getting up. I closed the door but didn't lock it. "I don't know what I'm doing here," I replied. He stood up, approached slowly, and said, "You're doing exactly what you want." The rest happened in silence. No words, just breathing. The pent-up tension exploded in an instant. He grabbed me by the shoulders, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I've thought about this for weeks." I couldn't answer. My body spoke to itself. It was desire, but it was also anger. It was as if, in that moment, I wanted to prove something. To him, to myself, to the world. When it was all over, he stood, straightening his tie. "Between us that never happened," he said. "You understand, don't you?" I just nodded, trying to appear calm, but inside I was in chaos. The mix of guilt, pleasure, fear, and anger made my heart race. In the days that followed, the world returned to normal, at least on the outside. But every time he walked by, I remembered. The way he looked, the way he said my name. All of it now carried a new weight. And even though I tried to act natural, I knew what happened in that room would change everything. And it changed. Little by little, he began to treat me differently. Sometimes coldly, sometimes with disguised intimacy. It was as if he constantly wanted to test me, to see if I'd say something, if I'd waver. And I didn't. I kept everything bottled up. Until the day he called me again. And this time his tone was different. "We need to be more careful," he said. "People talk." I replied, "There's nothing to talk about, is there?" He laughed. "It's up to you." That laugh hit me harder than any touch. It confirmed that for him this was all a power play, but for me it wasn't, and that's when the anger began to build. If you've ever experienced something like this, a relationship where desire mixes with manipulation, where pleasure comes with shame, then you know what I felt. The body wants it, but the conscience screams. And it's in this conflict that we lose ourselves. I know many people watching now might judge. You might think, "Well, but why didn't he just leave? Why did he let it happen?" But anyone who's experienced the imbalance between power and desire knows that sometimes the line between consent and pressure is so thin that it's only visible after the fact. And maybe that's why I decided to tell this story. Because there are so many people living in situations like this, silent, confused, caught between the fear of losing everything and the fear of giving themselves completely. But what came next, what he did when he realized I wasn't the same anymore, was what really turned the story upside down. Before we do that, I want you to do one thing. If you understand the gravity of this, if you believe stories like this need to be told, please like it now. This will help the video reach more people and make YouTube understand that this type of content has value. And comment below what you think. It can be a word, a reaction, or just an "I understand," because understanding is the first step to breaking the silence. The following week, everything seemed quieter than usual. The office, once filled with voices, footsteps, and keyboard tapping, now felt like an empty stage. I knew why. After that night, after all of that, nothing would ever be the same. But he, the man who had been in control until then, acted as if nothing had happened. He smiled in the hallways, shook hands, and doled out compliments, and it drove me crazy, because behind that calm face was the same man who had locked me in a room and whispered, "Now, no one has to know." The first day I tried to avoid his gaze, pretend what happened was a mistake, an isolated moment. But the problem is, the body doesn't lie. Just hearing his voice made my heart race, just smelling his perfume, and it all came back. The touch, the heat, the mix of fear and pleasure. It was as if, instead of erasing it, it had made me addicted. And he knew it. On Thursday, he stopped by my desk and left a note. Simple, direct, in small, firm handwriting. "Meeting room 7 p.m., just the two of us." I stared at that note for minutes, as if it were a bomb about to explode. I knew I shouldn't go. But I did. When I arrived, the room was dark. Only the light from the hallway filtered through the cracks in the door. He was sitting jacketless, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his gaze fixed on me. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, and this time his voice was different, lower, huskier, as if carrying something long suppressed. "You shouldn't have come," I replied, trying to maintain control. He stood up, came to me, and said, "But you came, and that's what matters." There were no more words. He pulled me by the shirt, with unexpected strength, and pressed me against the wall. The kiss came like a blow, quick, intense, mixed with anger and desire. It was as if all the boundaries I'd tried to maintain had shattered at once, and in that moment, I didn't think about right or wrong. I just felt. The whole room seemed to spin. His breath mingled with mine, The heat of his hands pressed against the back of my neck, our bodies colliding as if time had vanished. It was forbidden, dangerous, yet impossible to resist. For a few minutes, the world shrank to that space, that touch, that feeling of being alive, even if it was for the wrong reason. When it was all over, we fell silent. He looked at me with a half-smile, the kind of smile of someone who thinks they've won. "Now yes, we understand each other," he said. I didn't respond, I just left. But in the following days, I realized it wasn't over. It had only just begun. He started acting different, more confident, more provocative. Sometimes he'd call me into the living room just to talk about trivial matters, but his look always said something else. "Are you tense?" he'd ask, feigning innocence. I pretended not to hear, until one day during a company party he walked past me, put his hand on my back and whispered, "I liked yesterday." But yesterday hadn't existed, not in that sense. He was toying with me, playing to see my reaction. And I hated to admit it, but part of me reacted anyway. From then on, a game began that I couldn't stop. One day he'd completely ignore me, pretending I didn't exist. The next, he'd taunt me with words only I understood. It was as if he had me in his hands, and the worst part was somehow I let him. But what I didn't know is that his game went far beyond what I imagined. One night I received a text message. It wasn't from him, but from an unknown number. A photo. The two of us, in the living room. The kiss, the touch, everything. The floor sank. I felt my blood run cold. "Who are you?" I replied. The reply came seconds later. "He sends his regards." The next morning, I arrived at work with shaking legs. He was there, smiling, drinking coffee, greeting everyone. When he saw me, he simply raised his cup and winked. I got the message. He wanted to show me he was in control, that if I dared to speak, he had the power to destroy my reputation in seconds. But what he didn't realize is that this freed me, because when someone threatens you with the truth, what saves you is stopping being afraid of it. And that's when I started to change the game. I began to observe more. I kept track of evidence, conversations, schedules. He thought I was still the same scared man from the first night, but I wasn't. Fear had become strategy. I knew that sooner or later his own power would turn against him, and that's exactly what happened. One Friday night, the company hosted a dinner. I didn't want to go, but I did. The atmosphere was light, relaxed, and full of laughter. He was there, as always, the center of attention. He joked, told stories, and everyone listened to him as if he were an exemplary leader. I watched from afar, trying not to show anything, until he came up to me, a glass of wine in his hand, and said, "We need to talk." I replied, "Again?" He laughed. "Not here, later, in my car." When the party ended, he was waiting for me outside. I went in. He drove in silence for a few minutes until he stopped in a secluded spot in the empty parking lot of a building under renovation. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, repeating the words from that night. I smirked. "You seem to like locked doors." He looked at me, surprised, and then smiled back. "You learned quickly." And it was at that moment that I noticed something different. He wasn't as confident as before. His hands were shaking a little on the steering wheel. His eyes were averted. It was as if, finally, he was afraid too. He turned off the car, turned to me and said, "I can't stop thinking about you." The words came out without the same control as before. He was a man stripped of his own power, vulnerable. And for the first time, I saw him for who he truly was. Not a predator, but someone who had spent his life hiding who he was. "Then why did you use me?" I asked. He remained silent. "Because it was easier than admitting how I felt," he replied. The confession hit me like a punch. The anger, the desire, the confusion, it all came back at once. He leaned closer, rested his forehead against mine, and said, "I'm sorry." The kiss that came next had no anger, no power. It had truth. It was quick, intense, unlike any other. A kiss from someone who for the first time didn't want to win. When he walked away, he looked like a different man. "No one will understand this," he said. I replied, "Maybe they don't have to. What matters is that we understood." But what happened next was what changed everything. And that's where the story begins to take a different turn. The point at which the secret stopped being just between two men and began to threaten the world he was trying so hard to protect. If you got this far, comment the word true in the comments so I know you're following this story until the end. The next morning, the atmosphere in the office was strange, heavy, unlike anything I'd ever felt. People weren't looking directly at me, but I could feel it. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Whispers rose and fell as I passed, and glances, some curious, some judgmental, followed me to my desk. That's when I realized someone knew. I couldn't tell how far the story had spread or who was spreading it, but the damage had already begun. He, my boss, feigned normality. He greeted us with the same polite smile, the same professional tone of voice, as if nothing had happened. But all it took was a glance to understand that fear had also reached him. The control he'd once held was beginning to slip. And the strangest thing is that for some reason, this gave me a strange feeling, a mixture of relief and silent revenge. For the first time, he seemed vulnerable. During the day, I received a text message from him on my phone. "Meet me after work, it's important." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, my heart racing, and then deleted the notification. I pretended not to see it. But I knew he wouldn't leave it at that. As the clock struck 7 and the lights began to dim, I heard the door to my office slowly open. He was there, tieless, his face drawn, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "We need to talk," he said, his tone a mix of firmness and desperation. "Not here," I replied. He looked around and whispered, "Then come with me." We went up to the top floor, where the company's disused offices were located. The hallway was empty and the air felt cooler there. He opened a door, ushered me in and locked it. The sound of the latch echoed like déjà vu. "Did you tell me?" he asked. "Tell me what?" I replied. "You know what." We stood face to face. His eyes were different, not the arrogant look from before, but the look of someone afraid. "If this story gets out of here, I'm finished." "Do you understand that?" he said. "Finish how? Lose your job or lose the image of the perfect man you portray to the world?" He was silent for a few seconds. "Both." I took a step forward. "And what do I lose in all this?" He didn't answer. He just breathed deeply, tensely, as if holding back a scream. Then, suddenly, he said, "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know how to deal with how I feel." The words were ragged but sincere. He leaned closer and I smelled the same scent as before, the same scent that had haunted me for weeks. "I don't know what you did to me," he said. "Since that night, I haven't slept well. I try to pull away, but I can't. I think about you all the time. I should have backed away. I should have turned and walked away. But I didn't. I stood there staring at him, as if seeing a part of myself I didn't want to see." He reached out hesitantly. I let him touch my face. It was a light touch, almost an apology. Before I knew it, we were already too close. The kiss came again, this time without guilt, without hiding. It was intense, desperate, full of everything that had been bottled up over the past few weeks. Tension turned to heat, fear turned to impulse. And there, in that forgotten room in the building, amidst furniture covered in sheets and dust, we surrendered ourselves in a way that was irrevocable. It was as if the entire world had vanished. No rules, no titles, no hierarchy. Just two men who, for a moment, stopped lying to themselves. He trembled, and so did I. Every movement was a risk, but also a liberation. When it was over, silence fell. The sound of heavy breathing was the only noise in the room. He sat on the edge of the table and ran his hands over his face. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. I laughed humorlessly. "You always say that." He looked up, and there was something different there, a mix of guilt and admiration. "You don't understand how dangerous this is for me." "For you?" I asked. "And for me. Do you think it's easy being someone's secret?" He was quiet for a few seconds, then replied, "Maybe I never had the courage to be more than that." And he left. The next day, the office was in chaos. An anonymous email was circulating among departments. Short, direct sentences describing inappropriate behavior by one of the bosses. He didn't name names, but there was no need. All he had to do was piece together the pieces. He called me into his office and locked the door, again. "Was it you?" he asked. "No," I replied. And it was true. "But it seems your castle has started to fall on its own." He remained silent, staring at me. Then he said softly, "They will investigate. They will destroy me." For a moment, I felt sorry, and at the same time I felt like maybe it was fair. He'd spent months playing on other people's fears, and now it was fear that was eating him up. In the following days, he disappeared from the office. No one knew exactly where he'd gone. Rumors swirled: leave, medical leave, personal crisis. Each version was more absurd than the last. But the void he left was real, and it was in this emptiness that I began to notice something strange. Old messages he'd sent me began disappearing from his phone. Emails were being deleted. Conversations were disappearing. It was as if someone was cleaning up their tracks. That's when I understood. He hadn't given up. He was trying to erase the evidence before anyone found it. One night, I came home and found an envelope under my door, no return address. Inside, a photo, the two of us at our hotel. He was smiling for the camera. I was distracted. On the back, just a handwritten sentence: "You too have something to lose." My heart froze. I realized the game wasn't over. It had just changed boards. From that moment on, fear and desire began to mingle again. Because, as much as I hated to admit it, part of me still wanted to see him, still wanted to understand what he truly felt. And above all, I wanted to know how far he would go to hide what we'd done. A week later, I got a message from him. "We need to talk, alone." And that's when it all started again. If you got this far, comment the word secret down here. Because that's exactly what this story is about. The weight a secret can carry when desire and fear walk side by side. That night, after the text that said, "We need to talk, alone," I stood there staring at my phone screen, as if it might give me an answer. It was late, and the silence in the apartment seemed louder than ever. I knew he was teasing me again, mixing guilt and desire in the same sentence. And even though I knew it was dangerous, something inside me wanted to go. It was as if a part of me needed to understand where this was all going, or perhaps how it would end. I waited until the clock struck almost 10 o'clock and left. The air was cold, the sky heavy, and the city seemed asleep. He'd sent me the address, a small hotel downtown, one of those discreet ones with a side entrance and yellowish light. When I arrived, he was already there, in room 203. The door was ajar, the light dim, the sound of rain tapping on the window. "I thought you weren't coming," he said, leaning against the wall, tireless, his shirt unbuttoned. I closed the door. "You called me, didn't you? So just tell me what you want." He stepped forward slowly, his eyes fixed on mine. "I want to understand what this is, what we did, what I feel when I look at you." That disarmed me. I could have walked away, but I didn't. Because as wrong as everything was, there was something there I couldn't erase. Not from my skin, not from my mind. He moved closer. I could smell his perfume, the heat of his body, and the silence between us turned into something dense, almost electric. "Don't say anything," he whispered, and he kissed me. I wanted to believe it, but a part of me knew the problem was bigger than a photo. It was what it represented, because deep down, the image was just a mirror of something that had been crumbling for a long time. The secret. And secrets, once they start leaking, never stop. The next morning, the bombshell went off. A copy of the photo was left on the receptionist's desk, inside a manila envelope with no return address. Within an hour, half the building knew. Looks began to change. Some were filled with contempt, others with curiosity, and the worst, silence. Those who pretended not to know but secretly judged. I was called into the Human Resources office. The questions came with the cold courtesy of someone who already knows the answer. "Can you confirm this photo is real? Was there some kind of personal relationship with Mr. Eduardo?" I answered, trying to remain calm, but inside everything burned. I knew any wrong word could backfire. At the end of the day, I received the notice: indefinite leave. And him? Same. Only the treatment was different. For him, administrative leave. For me, conduct evaluation. Power once again showing which side it was on. I spent the next few weeks trying not to go crazy. The messages from colleagues stopped, my friends disappeared, and even my phone felt heavier. Sometimes I thought about disappearing, moving to a new city, starting over. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. That look of guilt and desire that haunted me even in my dreams. Until one night he appeared at my door, deep dark circles, unshaven, and a tired look. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated but opened the door. He entered, stood in the middle of the room, looking around as if searching for a piece of the past that still lingered. "Are you okay?" I asked. He gave a short laugh. "Okay. I lost everything. Family, reputation, job, and worst of all, it was for something that to this day I can't regret." I remained silent. He stepped closer. "The photo doesn't matter anymore," he said. "What matters is that after all this, I still think about you." I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. He took another step. "If you want me to leave, I will. But if you want me to stay..." He didn't need to say the rest. His body spoke for him. The kiss came quickly like the first time, only this time it was different. There was no guilt, no power, no fear. It was a reunion. Two broken men trying to rebuild themselves in the same body. He pressed me against the wall, his hand steady, his gaze intense. I felt the weight of months of silence turn to fire on my skin. The night was long, and for the first time, I felt no shame, just a strange sense of freedom. It wasn't love, maybe not even passion. It was recognition. Two broken mirrors trying to fit together. Afterwards, lying on the couch, he told me what he'd discovered. The photo was taken by someone at the company, an IT guy. He was selling information to a group that wanted to take me down. I looked at him in disbelief. "And what do they get out of it?" "Power," he replied. "It's always power." We were silent. The sounds of the city outside seemed distant. He turned his head and said, "I can still try to make amends. I have contacts, people who owe me favors, but to do that I need to disappear for a while." "Disappear," I repeated. He nodded. "Disappear. Change your name. Go to another country, and I wanted you to come with me." That took me by surprise. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. "You want to run away?" I asked. "It's not escape, it's survival." I ran my hand over my face, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to leave. Part of me wanted to stay and face it all. But the way he looked at me, it was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. 2 days later, he texted me an address and a time. "If you're coming, go without telling anyone." I spent the entire day torn between fear and desire. When the clock struck 7, I was there. It was a simple house on the outskirts. He stood at the gate, backpack on his back, and a weary expression. "Fair you came," he said, relieved. "I thought you weren't going." "I thought so too," I replied. We went in. Inside there were few things: an open suitcase, scattered documents, 2 tickets. "Where to?" I asked. "Lisbon. A contact of mine will arrange everything there. New name, new job." I stared at those passages for a while. It was tempting to start over, away from everything, away from the shame. But at the same time, it felt like cowardice. "What if it doesn't work out?" I asked. "What if they find you there?" He smiled. "At this point, what does success mean?" The sound of the car outside silenced us. A headlight illuminated the window. He looked through the crack and went pale. "It's her," he murmured. "My wife." Before I could react, she knocked on the door. "Open up, Eduardo. I know you're there." He hesitated. I stood there, my heart pounding. "Open up now or I'll call the police." He opened it. She walked in with firm steps, her eyes hard, her voice cold. "So this is where you're hiding." She looked at me and said, "And you took him with you, of course." "You don't understand," he tried to say, but she cut him off. "I do understand. I understand that you're a coward, and that you destroyed not only your life, but the lives of everyone around you. She placed an envelope on the table. "Do you want to disappear? Well, it's too late now. This photo is already circulating everywhere. Newspapers, social media, even company groups. Everyone's seen it." The silence that followed felt like a punch. I looked at him. He looked at me. It was the end. Of any disguise, of any plan. She turned and left. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed like a sentence. He sat down, his hands on his face. "It's over," he said. "Now it's really over." But inside me something told me no, that this wasn't the end yet. Because stories like this never end with a period. There's always someone willing to rewrite what's left. If you got this far, comment the word "end" with a question mark. Because what comes next is what happens when desire becomes survival and forbidden love turns into open warfare. The kiss wasn't calm or pretty. It was urgent, heavy, filled with anger and desire at the same time. It was the kind of kiss that doesn't ask for permission, that springs from what has been repressed for too long. His hands held tight, as if to reassure me that I was real. My head told me to stop, but my body had already chosen. The clothes fell quickly, mixed with short words, uneven breathing, and the muffled sound of the rain outside. Time lost its meaning. There was no longer blame, no leadership, no fear. Just two men trapped in the same desire, allowing themselves to exist for a few minutes without explanation. When it was over, we were silent. He lay beside me, his chest rising and falling, his gaze lost at the ceiling. "This shouldn't have happened," he murmured. "But it did," I replied, "and there's no point in pretending it didn't." He turned to me and said, "You don't understand. If they find out, I'll lose everything." I laughed wearily. "You've always been afraid of losing what was never really there." He was quiet for a while, then said, "And you? What do you lose?" The question kept echoing, because deep down I knew I had something to lose too. My peace, my job, my reputation. But what I feared losing most was the little control I still had left. He stood up, went to the window and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled in the air, as if telling a story we didn't have the courage to say out loud. "I wanted you from day one," he confessed, "but desire scared me. I always tried to appear like the right man, the faithful husband, the exemplary boss, the perfect citizen. But when you arrived, I started to lose my character." I stared at him, trying to figure out where this was going. "What now?" I asked. He took a long drag and replied, "Now I don't know who I am." In that sentence, I realized he wasn't just confessing. He was asking to be forgiven for existing outside the mask he'd created. And somehow, that touched me more than I wanted to admit. But before I could say anything, there was a knock on the door. 3 quick knocks. He froze. I looked at him, confused. "Expecting someone?" I asked. He shook his head. The knock came again, louder. "Open up. I know someone's there." It was a female voice. His blood ran cold. He stubbed out his cigarette, ran his hands through his hair and whispered, "That's my wife." My heart raced. I looked at the floor, the scattered clothes, the messy bed. "Are you kidding me?" I asked quietly. He shook his head quickly, terrified. She followed me. She saw me leaving. The knocking turned into pounding. "Open this door now." He took a deep breath and said, "Be quiet. I'll handle it." He hurriedly put on his shirt and opened the door halfway. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. "Who's in there?" she shouted. I heard a voice. I froze, my entire body on alert. She pushed open the door and walked in. Her eyes scanned the room in seconds, the glass of whiskey, the unmade bed, the towel on the floor. And then she saw me. The silence was deafening. "Oh my God," she whispered. She looked at him, then at me, and the tears began to fall. "Is it with him?" He tried to speak, but she pushed him away forcefully. I should have known. I always suspected. She left, slamming the door so hard it echoed in her chest. He stood there, staring into space. I dressed in silence. "It's over," I said. "You destroyed everything." He turned his face away, his eyes welling up. "No. Now it all started." I left the room without looking back. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy. I walked through the wet streets feeling as if the whole world had changed in just a few hours. For the next few days, he didn't show up at work. Total silence. No texts, no calls. Until one Friday night, the phone rang. "I need to see you," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's important." I hesitated, but agreed. The meeting was in a secluded, nearly empty bar. When I arrived, he was in a corner with a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "She left," he said, without looking at me. "She took everything. House, children, name. She said she's going to expose me." I sat across from him. "You should have thought of that before." He looked up, his eyes glinting strangely. "And you think I regret it?" That took me by surprise. He continued, "I don't regret it, because for the first time I was real. With you, I was myself, and that scares me, but it also frees me." That sentence kept going around in my head. He was broken, but he seemed more alive than ever. It was as if he'd lost everything to finally gain something he'd never had, truth itself. He held my hand for a moment, and the touch was different. There was no more power, no more fear, just two men trying to make sense of what was left after the chaos. But the chaos wasn't over yet, because what he didn't know, and what I still didn't have the courage to tell him, was that someone had taken a photo that night at the hotel, and that photo was about to change everything. If you got this far, comment the word chaos, because that's what comes next, the moment when desire turns to scandal, and the truth finally explodes. That night, when he held my hand in that bar and told me he had no regrets, something changed forever. His look was no longer that of a boss trying to control. It was that of a man who had lost everything and at the same time seemed ready to face whatever came. But what came wasn't simple. Because in the real world, consequences don't knock on the door. They break down. 2 days later, I was at work when I received an anonymous message. No name, no signature, just an image, a clear photo of us inside the hotel room. I was reading something on my phone. He was sitting next to me, his shirt half open, the kind of photo that leaves no doubt. The caption was short: "Everything comes to light, sooner or later." My heart raced. My first thought was, who took this? And the second, why now? I felt the blood drain from my face. I closed my phone and looked around, but no one seemed to know anything. The office was in the same rhythm as always, keyboards, voices, distant laughter. But inside me, chaos had already begun. I texted him, "We need to talk." The reply came quickly, "Not here." We arranged to meet that evening in the building's parking lot. When I arrived, he was already leaning against his car, his face tense. "Who else saw this?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair nervously. "I don't know, but I received the same photo, and with it came a threat." "What kind of threat?" I asked. He showed me his cell phone. It was the same number, the same tone. "Either you two disappear from the company, or this image goes to the board." The silence between us was suffocating. A light rain was beginning to fall, the drops hitting the hood of the car, as if marking the time we didn't have. "Someone's trying to destroy us," he said, "but I'm going to find out who." 40 minutes before the door opened, everything was calm on the outside and chaotic on the inside. The room was dimly lit. The city glowed through the window. He and I were alone. He paced in circles. His shirt was open at the top button. His tie was in his pocket. His cell phone vibrated non-stop. He said, "It's nothing," but his voice betrayed it was something big. I saw fear on his face. I felt fear in my body, too. It was that mixture of desire, guilt, and danger that only those who have experienced it can explain. Suddenly, my computer beeped. An unnamed email arrived. The subject line read, "You're not the only one he calls after work." It had 3 attachments. The first was a receipt for the ride, departure from the office, destination motel, hours of stay. The second was a record of his badge. Saturday night, quick entry into the company. The third was a photo of the covered parking lot. 2 cars, 2 very close times, the shadows of 2 men. I recognized my sneakers. I recognized his coat. My stomach turned. There was no threat, just cold facts. He saw my screen and froze. Who sent this? I said, I don't know, but someone's watching. He went to the door and turned the key, locked it, as if the lock would erase the evidence. I remembered the first time he said, "Now no one needs to know." That day the phrase felt like a sweet secret. Today it felt like handcuffs. I opened the attachments again. I looked calmly. The receipt showed the time and license plate. His badge showed his time at the company before the motel. The photo was reflected in the glass of the fire door. A third person had passed by. In other words, we've never been as alone as he always said. Who has access to this? I asked. He responded automatically. IT, security, reception, finance. He paused and murmured, "And at home." I repeated, "At home?" He nodded. "She has my email password." Then it became clear. It could be someone at the company, tired of the repeated film. It could be his wife, tired of the sham marriage. One way or another, someone pressed the light switch. There was an audio message in the email. I played it. It was short with a hiss. Our voices in the hallway another night. Him. "Lock the door." Me. "Are you sure?" Him. "No one needs to know." The sharp click of the key. The end. Instantly I remembered the sensation of hot skin and held breath. Yes, there had been a motel. There had been a kiss. There had been body contact. I don't need to elaborate. Adults understand. It was real. It was desire. It was intense. And it was hidden. Now, the bill has arrived. "This proves nothing," he said, trying to hold back the escaping breath. "Standard proof," I replied, "and standard becomes history." He gripped the edge of the table as if trying not to fall. "I don't know how to lose," he confessed. I said, "Then learn, today." He looked at me with anger and a plea for help at the same time. Anyone who has loved wrongly recognizes that look. The hallway lights came on all at once, sensor, footsteps, 2 shadows on the glass, 3 firm knocks on the door. The handle turned, it was locked. A voice came clear, without a shout. "Open up, Roberto." It was her. He took 2 long seconds. He turned the key. She entered. Alone. Dark coat, hair tied back, a leather briefcase in her hand. She glanced at me quickly, then she scanned the room. Cups, window, the overturned picture frame, the still warm key. She didn't ask what's going on. She brought an answer. She placed a manila envelope on the table. Sign. Inside was what I'd received and more. Credit card statements showing expenses at the motel bar. 2 nights on different days. A refund request rejected with the phrase, "Does not belong to the cost center." Screenshots of his conversation with another guy. Late-night messages. Emojis that don't match work. She didn't come out of cheap jealousy. She came for the right reason. "Before you say I misunderstood, I investigated," she said. She pointed to a photo of the parking lot. "It's not just about him with you. It's about him with others, before you." He remained silent. She opened another page. "Consensual separation. You keep the apartment. I keep the peace. Sign." The clock changed from 9:09 to 9:10. He picked up the pen. His hand shook. "You're going to destroy my career." She replied simply, "You destroyed it yourself. I just turned on the light." She turned to me. "You're free from his secret, if that's what you call freedom." There was no hatred in her voice. There was weariness. It was over. He signed, the same beautiful handwriting used to sign contracts and resignations. Now it served to acknowledge what he'd tried to hide. I felt 2 things at once, relief and grief. Relief at being freed from the prison of "no one needs to know." Grief for the piece of my life that remained in that room. He tried. "I love you," I replied. "You love to control. And you called it love." It hurt him. It hurt me too. Because I knew that at many moments I'd accepted the game. I'd enjoyed the risk. I'd wanted the secret. But secrets don't protect. Secrets take their toll. His phone vibrated. A message from the principal. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., conduct." He looked at me for cover. "Stay with me today." I said, "No." "Are you going to abandon me?" "I'm going to save myself." I gathered my things. Before leaving, I turned the picture frame right side up. Not for him, for me. No more living with the image upside down. In the hallway, the security guard pretended not to see, but I could tell he knew. In the elevator, the mirror showed me a tired but lighter-faced man. At the reception desk, the woman looked up and whispered, "It's going to be okay." That gave me strength. Outside, the air was different. I walked to my car. My phone vibrated again. Another unnamed email. "If you want to quit, talk to the right person." Attached, a spreadsheet with names, dates, times, places. It was a years-long pattern. It wasn't just about me, nor just about him. It was a much larger system made of closed doors and dirty favors. I already knew the path. Gather evidence, seek compliance, speak to outside legal counsel, and, if necessary, the press. In the right order. No shouting, no bravado. A man who's lived understands. Courage with method turns into justice. Courage without method turns into ruin. In the car, I remembered the motel. I remembered the first touch. I remembered the heat of the cheap room, the heavy curtains, the way he pulled me by the nape of the neck, as if the world would end if we didn't touch each other right then. Was it sex? Yes. Was it good? Yes. Was it right? No. We desired each other like two adults who spent too much time pretending they felt nothing. But desire doesn't erase responsibility. What he did with power had nothing to do with love. Love looks you in the eye with the door open. What we experienced was something else. Secrets fueled by adrenaline. I went home. I took a long shower. I sat at the table with my notebook. I wrote down everything. The time she knocked, the 3 knocks, the pen in the middle of the table, the phrase, "I'll keep the peace," his, "I love you," the, "I'll save myself," I said. I wrote down the room number, the position of the picture frame, the principal's message. I wanted to remember every detail. Evidence isn't revenge. Evidence is defense. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my body feeling light and heavy at the same time. Light from having left, heavy from knowing the next day would be hell. 8 in the morning. A glass room, 3 people, a recorder, papers on the table. I was going to speak. Without shouting, without attacking. Tell them, clearly, directly, with dates, with screenshots, with facts. And if someone asked me why I took so long, I would tell the simple truth. Fear. Fear of losing my job. Fear of being the subject of gossip. Fear of hearing that it was my fault. Fear of, but you wanted it. I wanted the man. I didn't want the abuse. It sounds complicated. It's not. Adults understand. Before sunrise, I received another message. It was from my new colleague. Just 2 words. "Thank you, courage." I understood the message. Many people were waiting for someone to open the door from the inside, not to expose anyone's life, but to stop the cycle, so that the next person wouldn't go through the same thing, so that "no one needs to know" would become "everyone needs to understand." I closed my eyes and imagined the next day's scene. Me sitting, the director next to me, the HR woman with a blue folder, a company lawyer with a stiff jaw, me telling him about untimely emails, made-up tasks, a locked door, an invitation with the excuse of an urgent project, a motel named after a flower, a receipt, a badge, hallway audio, a standard spreadsheet, no frills, just what happened. And at the end, a short sentence. Door open, I work. Door closed, I get up and leave. Dawn broke. I got up. I put on a simple shirt. I looked in the mirror. I saw an older man. Yes, but I also saw someone who had left the victim role and taken on the role of adult. Not to be a hero, to be clear. Sometimes that's what changes everything. Speaking clearly, at the right time, in the right place. I left home before the traffic. The sky was an orange stripe. As I drove, I thought about him, about the man who once pulled me by the waist and whispered, "Stay," about the boss who used the same whisper to say, "No one needs to know." Both of us inside the same body. I wasn't angry at that moment. I was focused. I already understood what secrecy does to us. It's addictive. Today, I've chosen another addiction, peace of mind. I parked, I looked at the building, I took a deep breath, I went upstairs. When the elevator door opened, I saw the glass room at the end of the hallway, and I thought to myself, now the shadows are gone. Today it's light. If you've made it this far, comment on one word that sums up what you felt at this point in the story. It could be light, it could be courage, it could be enough. I want to read what's going through your head, and stay with me, because the next step, at 8 o'clock sharp, is where the truth enters the table and begins to change the game. The next morning I arrived early. The building was still half empty. The security guard greeted me with that somewhat suspicious, "Good morning," the kind of greeting of someone who's heard something but doesn't want to get involved. I walked up in silence, each step toward the glass room feeling heavier. Inside, the director, the woman from HR, and a lawyer were already there. The table was clear, except for the recorder in the middle and 3 glasses of water. I sat down. The director began, "We want to understand what happened." And I thought, understand. That word hurts, because anyone who's lived through what I've lived doesn't want to be understood. They want to be believed. I told them everything, every detail, the email with no return address, the phrase "no one needs to know," the motel, the receipt, the audio. I spoke without shouting, without crying. I just told them. They looked at each other several times. The HR woman took notes. The lawyer just took deep breaths. The director asked, "Do you have any evidence?" I opened the folder and slid out the papers, the screenshots, the attachments. "Everything here." He read quickly. He nodded, and someone pressed the recorder button. "Thank you for speaking up. We'll investigate." Investigation is a fancy word, but I knew. Inside, the game was dirty. When I left the room, I felt the hallway air hit my face, a mixture of relief and fear. Relief at having spoken, fear of what was to come, because anyone who denounces power becomes a threat, and companies don't like threats. I returned to my desk. Some curious glances, others blank. The gossip was already spreading. His chair was empty. The room was locked. "He's in an external meeting," they said. But I knew. He was being overheard too. The day dragged on slowly. The hours seemed to drag. In the afternoon, I received a short email from HR. "Your cooperation is essential. We ask for discretion." Discretion. The same word he used to silence me. That evening, I left the building with a weight on my chest. Outside, the sky was cloudy, the wind cold. I got in my car and stood for a few minutes, staring at my reflection in the window. And then, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "You're brave. He's not the only one. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., corner bar, back table." The name of the bar gave me chills. It was the same one he'd taken me to the first time it all started. I considered ignoring it, but something inside me told me I had to go. I arrived on time. The place was small, dark, and smelled of wood and cigarettes. In the back, a man in his 40s waved. His face was tired, his gaze firm. "You're the guy who reported it, right?" I nodded. He introduced himself as a former employee. He said he worked there 5 years ago. "He did the same thing to me," he said, staring into his glass. "Same script, and no one believed him." He showed old screenshots, emails, a message with the same words, "Lock the door. No one needs to know." It was the same script, the same trap. Only the names had changed. We talked for hours. I discovered similar stories with other men, other excuses, the same patterns. It was a cycle. Power, silence, and guilt. "You broke the chain," he said. "But now it's going to be war." And it was. In the following days, the phone calls began. Anonymous voices saying, "Be careful. You're messing with big people. They're going to bring you down." I slept poorly. I dreamed of the living room, the motel, the sound of the key turning. But for the first time it wasn't paralyzing, it was fuel. I had already lived with fear. Now I lived with the price of truth. A week later, the company scheduled a general meeting. They said it was to align internal guidelines. He sat there, pale, his gaze lost. The director talked about ethical behavior, safe environment, company values. Words too beautiful for a room that had already seen so much filth. In the end, he stood and asked to speak. "I want to step away indefinitely," he said. His voice was shaky, almost a whisper. No one asked why, but everyone knew. When he left, I felt the air shift. The sound of his footsteps felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the days that followed, everything seemed too quiet, until an envelope arrived on my desk, no return address. Inside, a handwritten letter. I recognized the handwriting. It was his. "I made a mistake," it began, "but not out of malice, out of cowardice." The letter was long. It spoke of a harsh childhood, of an abusive father, of the fear of being who I was. I learned to hide, and by hiding I destroyed. I read it to the end. The last sentence said, "If I could go back, I would have locked the door for another reason, to keep you from leaving." The paper smelled of perfume. The same scent I smelled on those nights when desire confused everything. For a moment I felt pity, but pity is treacherous. It makes us forget what it took to get here. I kept the letter. I didn't reply. The next day, the news spread. He'd resigned. He'd disappeared. No email, no goodbye. He'd just disappeared. And what remained was emptiness, a kind of silence that weighs heavily. I still saw his face everywhere, in the hallways, in the elevator, in meetings. The body remembers. It takes time for the body to unlearn fear, but over time fear began to become a memory, and the memory, a scar. A month later I received another message, this time from the same number as the corner bar. Just one sentence. "The story is out." I opened the link. An anonymous report, published on a whistleblower website. It talked about the case. No names, no faces, but those who knew, knew. It was him. It was the company. It was me. I read it all, from beginning to end. The text said, "Behind closed doors there are always those who confuse power with desire." And at the end, a sentence that seemed written for me. "Speaking is dangerous, but silence is worse." The news spread. The company responded with formal statements, promises of change, and ethical culture campaigns, all marketing. But amidst the hypocrisy, something real happened. Other voices began to emerge. People I never imagined would call me to talk. Older, quiet men with similar stories. Some laughed nervously, others cried. I realized that what I experienced wasn't an exception. It was a symptom. And that perhaps what I did had broken something bigger than the silence. It had broken the custom. In one of these conversations, one of them told me he'd also been to the motel, that he'd also heard, "No one needs to know." But unlike me, he stayed, and stayed for years. "Fear becomes routine," he said, "and when you get used to fear, the abuser wins." That struck me, because it was true. Fear is a comfortable cage. We adapt. We learn to breathe less to fit inside, until the day we run out of air. I decided not to hide anymore. I changed departments, cities, addresses. I started over. Sometimes I still dreamed of the locked room, sometimes of his touch. Yes, his touch. Because even what hurts leaves marks that the body mistakes for lack. Desire and trauma go hand in hand, but over time I learned to look at it without shame, to understand that desire didn't make me guilty, that it was his fault for transforming desire into domination. Months later, I received an email from a new address. It was from him again. No subject line, just one line. "I miss what we didn't live properly." I didn't reply. I just deleted it. I knew every word I exchanged with him was a rope pulling me back to the same place, and I didn't want to go back, but I confess, I spent the rest of the day with my mind elsewhere, trying to figure out if it was anger or longing, and I realized it was just memory. The memory of a man who used power as a shield and desire as a weapon. Things started to get better. I went back to sleep. I started laughing again. I started writing about what I'd experienced, not with names, but with truths. People read, commented, said, "That sounds like my story." And I saw the effect. Each story told took away the power of those hiding behind closed doors. But sometimes the doubt still crept in. Had he changed? Had he regretted it? Or had he found someone else after hours to repeat the script? I don't know, and maybe it doesn't matter. The important thing was that I had left. And by leaving, I left the door open for whoever came after. If you've made it this far, comment on a word that defines you at this moment. It could be freedom, courage, or wake up. Because what I learned from this story is simple. Secrecy is the weapon of those who dominate, but the truth is the shield of those who survive. And what comes next is the moment when the truth finally finds those who tried to hide it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop. There were messages, missed calls, notifications that seemed to come from everywhere. Something had happened. I opened the first email, urgent, internal repercussion. The second was even more direct. Report published. Your name was mentioned. My heart raced. I clicked the link and there it was, a huge article headlined in bold letters, "Influential boss accused of abuse within the company." And in the middle of the text, a passage describing an older employee who decided to break the silence. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who I was. The phone rang again. It was the principal. His voice was tense. "I need you to come now." I threw on a random shirt and hurried out, my phone vibrating on the way. Messages of support, others of curiosity, and a few of threats. Liar. You destroyed a family. You don't know who you messed with. I took a deep breath and walked in. The building was swarming with cameras, journalists on the sidewalk, reporters trying to extract sentences. I lowered my head and went inside. Inside, the atmosphere was different. Absolute silence. The director was waiting for me in the glass room. At the table were the lawyer and two people I'd never seen before. "We need clarity," he said. "The situation has gotten out of control." I replied, "It was never ours to control." They didn't laugh. One of them handed me a tablet. On it, a short video, security footage from one of the hallway cameras. The night it all began, the door closing, his shadow and mine, and at the end, the sound of the key turning, that echoing phrase, "No one needs to know." The proof was there, real, indisputably. The director spoke softly. "This has leaked. The press already has it." I asked who leaked it. He replied, "We don't know, but someone on the inside." I remained silent. Part of me felt fear. Another part felt relief. Because, for the first time, the truth no longer depended on my voice. It existed on its own. It had sound, image, and context. It was real. He, the boss, hadn't shown up yet. He'd disappeared. No contact, no response. But mid-afternoon, the garage door opened and his car pulled in. I saw it through the window. He walked up slowly, wearing the same suit as always, only now wrinkled, no tie. As he passed through the hallway, eyes followed him like blades. And he noticed. He walked into the main room, looked at me, and simply said, "You won." I replied, "It wasn't a game." He laughed, a tired, almost broken laugh. "Everything's a game, you just didn't know the rules." The principal asked us to speak alone. He agreed. We stood there face to face once more. Only this time the door was open. He took off his badge, placed it on the table, and said, "I never thought it would end like this. You must have hated me." I looked at him and said, "I already did, now I just want to move on." He took a deep breath, looked around, and murmured, "You never understood. I saw in you what I could never be. Free." Those words caught me off guard. "Free," I repeated. He nodded. "You walked with your head held high, I didn't." For a moment the man controlling me seemed different. A small, afraid man trying to understand where he'd lost his way. "You know what's worse," he said? "I desired you as much as I feared you, and I didn't know how to deal with it." We fell silent. It was strange to hear. It was a confession, but also despair. And inside me, hatred and pity mingled until they became an impossible knot to undo. Then he did something I never expected. He took out his cell phone, opened the recorder, and said, "I take responsibility for everything, here now." And he started talking. His words were fast, nervous, choppy. He told me what he'd done to me and the others. He admitted it, name by name, date by date. I lied to everyone. I used my position to hide who I was. I can't bear to carry this anymore. He finished recording, saved the file, and handed me the device. Give it to whoever you want. I didn't touch it. I just said, you don't have to give it to me. He left his cell phone on the table and left. For the first time, the door remained open behind him. I didn't hear footsteps returning, only the sound of the elevator descending. Then, silence. Minutes later, the sound of sirens in the street. An ambulance. Word spread quickly. He'd fainted in the parking lot. A panic attack, they said. I didn't go check. Not because I didn't care, but because, in that moment, I understood his story was over. Mine wasn't. The following days were intense. The company released statements. The media exploited everything. They called it a corporate scandal, an emblematic case. I became a symbol of courage, a word that sounds beautiful but carries pain. I was invited to interviews, programs, even lectures. I turned down almost everything because I didn't want to be a character. I wanted to be a person. And little by little, I started breathing again. One night, weeks later, I received an envelope at home. No return address, no stamp. Inside, a folded sheet of paper. It was his handwriting again, but shaky. I've been institutionalized. I'm in therapy. For the first time, I'm trying to understand who I am without power. You forced me to look at myself. Thank you, even though it hurts. I read it slowly, and I realized something I'd never considered. Sometimes justice doesn't come with handcuffs, it comes with mirrors. And we don't always defeat others. Sometimes we defeat ourselves. I kept the letter, not out of nostalgia, but for memory. Because forgetting would be denying what I experienced, and denying would be a prisoner again. I continued writing in the notebook where it all began, but now without anger, just recording. One day maybe this will become a book, or a documentary, or simply a warning to those who still live trapped behind locked doors. On the last page, I wrote something simple. Freedom begins when we open our own doors. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not the false peace of appearances, but the kind that comes when you understand you no longer need to hide who you are. The next day, the sun rose brightly. I walked to my new job, a different building, a different city, a different beginning. I walked through the revolving door, looked at the security guard and thought, this time, no one's going to tell me to shut up. And I continued. If you've stuck around this far, it's because this story truly captivated you. And it's because of people like you that this channel exists. So do this. Before you leave your like now. Because it shows YouTube that you value intense, real stories that move us. And if still is not registered, take advantage of this moment and subscribe to the channel. Now here we talk about desire, power, secrets, and the truths that many people prefer to hide. Always with courage and without filters. Now I want to know, what was the moment in this story that impacted you the most? Write the word in the comments, Brings, so I know you stayed until the end and understood the true meaning of it all. The moment when the door closes and the silence begins to scream. And it doesn't come out yet. The next video is already appearing on the screen. Click on it and stay with me, because what comes next is even stronger, more intense and more real than you can imagine.